to the Writer Groupie podcast. I'm Kim Smith, the writing guru, bringing you discussions, insights, and insider details on planning, producing, promoting, and profiting as a writer. This is a podcast by writers for writers. You can find out more about Writer Groupie at www.writergroupie.net. And here's the next episode of Writer Groupie. Author of the Jarvis Mann PI Detective series. Did I say that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Private detective.
Right. And I love a good mystery. I'm a mystery writer myself, although mine's a little more humorous and slapstick than yours, I'm sure. Do yours kind of follow a police procedural feel? Tell us a little bit about you and your writing journey. That'll give us a little bit of an insight.
Sure. Well, I've been writing since I was a teenager, way before there was independent authors. As I've often said, I did a lot of poetry in my teenage years to deal with teenage angst, and now I write in my middle-age years to deal with middle-aged angst. But
I love that.
Yes. So it's good, but I've always had ideas and stories in me. Like I said, poetry I always thought was kind of a shorter version of actual stories, short stories and stuff. And then I kind of worked up to actually writing short stories. And then I wrote 3 novels back in the 80s that I tried to get published, but never had any luck getting published. Totally different set of characters, different timeline and everything. And they're still sitting in a filing cabinet over here, printed up on old paper, long time ago, probably very yellow now. And maybe someday I'll revisit those. But
I was fixing to say, do you think you'll ever pull them out of the archives and do anything with them?
I've thought about that. It'll need a lot of extensive rewriting because a lot of things, because of time change, 80s, and now, we're, 30 some years ago. So, I suppose I could go back in time and do it, but and say it was back in the 80s, but it would need a lot of updating. And right now I've got other ideas, I think, and so it's kind of just sitting there waiting. We'll see if someday I might pull it out and do it. I'm sure it needs a lot of work, though.
Have you ever done that? Have you ever pulled an old work out and reread it and thought to yourself, man, this is really good. I can't believe I wrote that.
Well, the first book in my Jarvis Mann series is a short story called The Case of the Missing Bubblegum Card, and I wrote that back in the 90s. And it before I got married, and I got married and we had a kid, and all that writing stuff kind of got put on the side. You're working, making money, and way before independent publishing days. And I pulled that out in about 2013, I think it was. And I pulled it out and I go, I'm going to take this, I'm going to update it. And the story was basically the same. He's helping a high school student who has an Ernie Banks rookie card that was stolen. But I had to update it for the time, and the value of the car is more expensive, and all that. And then I started looking into independent publishing, and there were quite a few. I found out about beta readers, so I tracked down some beta readers on the internet. You can find them through various sites and stuff, and people will read it for free. And several people said this would make a good series, and I'd actually begun with an idea to continue the detective with the next book. And so I pretty quickly wrote the first novel in the series, which was Tracking a Shadow, and that's where the series kind of was born and went from there. And I've actually got up to book 8 is coming out in March, so I've been busy the last 4 or 5 years.
So tell us who Jarvis Mann is and how he came to be. He's pretty much your best buddy. You drink coffee with him, and you sleep with him, and you wake up with him, and you spend a lot of time with your character. I know this because I do also. And so tell us about Jarvis Mann, and maybe tell us things about him that we need to know before we dive into a book.
Yeah, Jarvis is he's a lot like your classic hard-boiled noir type detective, but in modern times and this storylines and stuff. He's tough, he's snarky, and he's not the best boyfriend in the world. His love life is usually a mess. It's gotten better through the books, but he's always got that little person sitting on his shoulder, whispering in his ear, tempting him all the time,
Huh?
in a lot of ways. But he's pretty much your classic detective in a lot of ways. He really fights for his clients, works hard. He's not always the smartest guy in the world. You know, he makes some dumb mistakes. I make him as very human as I possibly can. But I love those old style detectives, you know, Philip Marlowe and, you know, Sam Spade and all those, you know, from way back. Mike Hammer. There've been many. And I was a big fan of Robert B. Parker. And Robert B. Parker wrote the Spencer series, which was very popular. And I was
One of my favorites.
yes, and he did Jesse Stone, and he passed away in 2010. But I really liked a lot of what he did, but I thought sometimes Spencer was a little too perfect. He did make mistakes, but you know, and his love life was pretty solid, though it did get messed up a few times and stuff. But I wanted to make a detective a little bit like that, but not always the smartest guy, getting in trouble. You know, he's not very successful a lot of times. Gets in with the wrong crowd, and it is the classic. So it's first person, so it's through his eyes. So everybody thinks I'm Jarvis. Someone asked me, "Are you Jarvis?" And I says, "Well, he was much more of a ladies' man than I ever was." And you can ask my wife about that because she would definitely confirm that fact. And I'm certainly not as tough as he is, but his sense of humor is definitely mine. And he's one of those guys who'll be getting, you know, somebody's threatening him and stuff, and he's gonna throw silly things at him to try to throw him off track. You know, he's getting his butt kicked and on the ground, and he's in the Front Range Butcher, which we'll talk about a little bit later. He's telling the guy, "Gee, did you not gargle today? Your breath stinks." While the guy's kicking him and stuff like that. You know, it's just the way it is. Sometimes it doesn't work well for him when he does the jokes, but sometimes, you know, it kind of backfires on him. You know, sometimes it helps, but other times maybe he should have kept his mouth shut.
I like books like that, though, because the character does step off the page. I mean, it does make them human. Yeah, I'm like you. A too perfect character is kind of hard to follow. And you're writing a long-term series. And so what difficulties do you face as you write this series? Because you say 8 books. To me, that's a great long series. How do you keep your character true from first book through 8th book, say, and how do you show his growth, or is it a kind of a series where he doesn't really grow, he just gets into new adventures? That's kind of what I'm writing.
Well, his personal life has grown some. He's learning. He made a lot of mistakes when it came, you know, some femme fatales, you know, got in there and, you know, messed with him a little bit. And, you know, he's learned, but it took him a while to learn, and it cost him certain relationships as well. And his personal life is really the biggest thing. His detective skills are probably a little better than they were, but he still makes a fair amount of mistakes. He kind of steps into things kind of blindly sometimes, and takes the punishment for it. But he's definitely evolved in many ways. And he's also second guessing himself as we get later through the books too, about whether this is the right life for him. You know, it's taken a little bit of a toll on him in a lot of ways. So I've tried to keep him very much very human and going through a lot of human emotions, and he's still searching for that thing, you know, as we all do sometimes. You know, yeah, this may be what I want to do, but maybe there's something better.
Yeah, that elusive.
I don't get my butt kicked, right? You know, and I'm not chasing, you know, because we talk about it all the time. Chasing around cheating husbands and taking pictures, or cheating spouses, whatever. And that's kind of the job of a lot of detectives, and it's kind of the crappy part of the job. It helps pay the bills, but you know, you kind of wish there was something maybe a little better to do.
Well, you know, because they see the real side of life, and that's not what they want to see, just like all of us.
Right.
Infidelity is never nice.
Yeah, that's right. And no matter what job you have, there are those parts of the job that you really hate, and there's parts of the job you really like. And
Right,
he
right.
likes helping his clients, and his clients are not always on the up and up too. You know, the clients have a tendency to have their own little dark secrets that kind of come back to bite him in the butt as well, and those always frustrate him as in the end as well. So.
So when you're writing your series, your novels, how do you weave subplot with plot? Because it sounds to me like you have a main plot going on, which is him solving the mystery aspect or doing his job basically. But you also have him being a human, being he's got a relationship with somebody, or, he lives in a house with a cat or whatever. You know what I'm saying? So how do you weave subplot and plot together and keep it interesting and keep the balls juggling in the end, or in the air, I mean, so that in the end you bring them all back together and tie it up? This is a question a lot of new authors ask.
Right. Well, and with my the last book, The Front Range Butcher, I actually had three major storylines going on in the book, plus his personal life. So I had a lot of balls in the air in that one, and basically I try to break it up in a little bit into sections. You know, you got obviously you got your beginning, middle, and end as you usually do, but in my books, I might go 2 or 3 chapters where he's dealing with one case, and then I might go 2 or 3 chapters where, well, now he's going to go to this case, and then we throw in his personal life in there. My character sits down and eats a lot. He meets with people eating.
Sure,
I
that's
saw that
part of
on
his
Twitter. Somebody was
business.
asking about that. It's like I don't see people. They don't go out to dinner and they don't eat. And in my books, he does that. It's where he interacts with his girlfriends, or he
Mm-hmm.
interacts with clients or potential clients. A lot of it's over food,
Mm-hmm.
and so I try to weave all that in, and it can be very challenging, because you want to be able to not you don't want to confuse the reader.
Right.
That's the other part. It's like, okay, well, I'm switching from this case to this case, and you got to make sure you're keeping it clear, and that definitely is a challenge, and that's where beta readers really help authors when you're putting stuff together, and even alpha readers, which are people who read early on in the process. Sometimes, like, I'm starting actually a new book with a new series with new characters, that may be a series, we hope. And I've actually reached out to some alpha readers, and gave them like the first 4 or 5 chapters. Would you think I'm on the right track here? Does this make sense? I mean, am I, not doing the right thing? So soliciting that type of help is great. And generally, beta readers and alpha readers, I've built up quite a few for 7 or 8 books. I have a lot of the same people who've read my stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and I think they're usually very, very honest with me and tell me, this sucks, or or
Right.
this, no, this is really good. You've got me hooked with this. So, but it is challenging, and I'm a pantser type of writer.
I am too.
So I very rarely outline. I keep track of some. I use Scrivenger a little bit to keep track of characters a little bit, so I'm not using same names and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I basically write, and I feel like the story kind of writes itself. It
I
seems
do too.
like, yeah,
I'm with you on that.
it seems like when I'm writing, and it may totally take me in a different direction. I'll sit down and think, well, maybe I'm going to go right, but I'm actually going left in this next chapter, because that
Mm-hmm.
seems to work the way I'm writing it right now, where it's coming out of my hands, or whatever the thought process is in there. So I piece all that together. Then I'll go back and read. I'll go through several chapters. And I'll go back and read, and so make sure that maybe I should have gone right instead of left, and all that. So, and then I kind of track it a little bit as I write. But I basically write, and I just let the story take me wherever it's going to take me. A lot of times, I feel like sometimes it writes itself. I like to think it's that easy. It's not, but that's the way it kind of comes out of me a lot of times.
And that's wonderful. And that's probably a good testimony as to why you've gotten so many books in your series already, is because you really don't have to work hard to get it on the page. It just kind of comes out. That's how it is for me when I'm into my series. I know exactly what you're saying, and that is a great feeling when you just sit down to write and you're expecting to turn out 250 words and it ends up being 25,000 words. You're just like, holy cow, I had no idea that was going to happen.
Yeah, very much. I'm a very much a cluster writer too. I might not write for several days, and then I'll write boom, and there's a whole bunch of stuff. And there'll be times when I can't go to sleep at night, as well. I'll have an idea in my head, and I can't get to sleep, and I have to come downstairs and get it out of my head so I can go to sleep, which is great. And sometimes I get great ideas sleeping before I go to bed, and sometimes maybe they aren't so great. But like this new book that I'm working on. I actually wrote the ending of the book before I was even 10 or 15 chapters into it.
That's
My
cool.
books, and it's a fairly long book. It's 70 some chapters. So I actually wrote the ending before I even was completely through. I knew how the book was going to end, and it just came to me. So I wrote it down. I got up that night and I wrote it down, got it typed in, and it basically worked with the way the story ended up going. I didn't have to change too much of it, but I knew
That's
that's
good.
how I wanted to end it.
Well, we've teased the listeners here with the couple of books that we're going to talk about. So the first book is the one you just came out with recently called The Front Range Butcher. And then coming in March is Man in the Crossfire. So tell us about Front Range Butcher. Tell us a little bit about what your character is going through in this book.
So there's
There
the
you
Front
go.
Range Butcher, and this is the Denver skyline. My books are all based in Denver. That's where I live, the Denver metro area. And it's dealing with a serial killer.
Oh, my.
And that's the main storyline. But there's two other storylines going on as well, one of which carries over into the next book. But he's dealing with a serial killer from 22 years ago who killed 16 people, had 16 victims, and suddenly stopped. And now is all of a sudden the victims start showing up again 22 years later. And he is hired by the father of one of his former girlfriends, which makes for a little bit of a humorous first chapter when the father, because Jarvis is meeting him thinking, is this guy going to kick my butt for breaking his daughter's heart? And he's actually going to give him a job. So
Oh, my.
He's the father was a newspaper man when there were newspapers. He doesn't work for him anymore because there's not a lot of newspapers left anymore. I mean, he does freelance work now, but he was an investigative reporter back 22 years ago. Thinks he knew who this killer was, but they never had enough evidence. The murder stopped. So he kind of was tracking it a little bit all these years, and now that they've started again, he wants Jarvis to get in and find out. And the issue is the person who they think is the killer really couldn't be the killer anymore for various reasons. I'll leave it up in the air. So the question is what? So we have a little bit of, and then Jarvis meets with this person, and they do a lot of chapters where it's those two going eyeball to eyeball, trying to one up each other. He's kind of a little bit of he's very smart, very intelligent, but he's like, I'm not the killer, but then he might throw little tidbits out there that maybe he is the killer. And they have a lot of one-on-one, and it kind of reminds me a little bit of Silence of the Lambs, maybe a little bit.
Yeah.
Those two characters that were going head-to-head. So I wanted to bring that psychological battle of wills between the two of them. And then it goes on, and then he's hired by an associate on another case to find someone that he's looking for various reasons, and I'll leave those out. And then there's a third storyline where Jarvis is in big trouble, at least gets in big trouble, relating to some issues in the past as well. So, but the main storyline is the serial killer, and I did a lot of research on serial killers, and I actually wrote an article that was published in the USA Today magazine, which, believe it or not, they have a magazine. Hardly anybody ever reads it, buys it, but about the research I did. And I did a lot of research on various, Zodiac Killer. Ted Bundy was a big one I did research on. There's a lot of talk about Ted Bundy these days because these new Netflix series, Ted Bundy tapes. And he did a lot of interviews after he was caught. But Ted Bundy actually came through Colorado. He started in California. escaped, came through Colorado, was actually, well, he was didn't escape, but he left Colorado because they thought they were getting him, and then was captured here and then escaped and ended up in Florida when they finally caught him. But he did a lot of interviews. But I did a lot of research on it, and I couldn't believe how many different classifications of serial killers there were. There's actually serial killers and sub-serial killer categories. Then you have mass murderers and thrill killers, and it was like, oh my gosh, who actually sits in a room and comes up with all these titles?
So now you know why you can't sleep some nights.
That's right.
The research is keeping you awake.
Yes, and that research did keep me awake some, but some of it I used. It was good to use. I mean, you put in serial killer in the Google search string, and you get, a million entries, and then you might narrow it down, and you might get it down to 600,000 or 700,000 entries. So, I mean, they have
right.
A list of the worst serial killers, a top 10 list, and I'm like, is this a David Letterman top 10 list gone bad? I mean, golly,
my.
ranking serial killers, and stuff. So.
Wow.
It was interesting stuff, and the debate on whether serial killers are born that way or whether it's a genetic issue or they become that way. It's a product of their environment, and there was a lot of different theories on how it happens, and I think it's it just depends on the person, like anything else. Some may be that way.
Pick a side for your character, your villain. Did you pick a side?
Pick a side, as in?
Yeah. As in which way he was he genetic or was he a made?
Yeah, we do get into his background a little bit, and so he's more environmental, it would seem, maybe a little bit genetic, but there's definitely a family issue that comes up in the book. And part of what Jarvis investigates. And I have a lot of twists and turns. All my books are like that. I mean, I try to throw curves at people, and you might think it's this and it's actually that, and then maybe it isn't that, and then it's this, and so I definitely try to keep that, and Jarvis is confused a lot of times as well.
Where did you get the title Front Range Butcher? Explain to us what that title means.
Well, you know how serial killers, they always give them names. They seem to give them names, like the Zodiac Killer. Most recently was the Back Bay Killer, I think it was, in the San Francisco area. And I actually, when I knew I wanted to do a book on the serial killer, I came up with it. And the Front Range is the Denver Front Range. We call the area here the Front Range.
Oh, okay.
So I figured, because there was a serial killer, they would name him, and then Butcher, which gets into how he kills his victims. Gotcha. So the newspapers, the media, in effect, named him the Front Range Butcher. And I actually kind of came up with that before I ever even had the full story. I just thought that was a very catchy title. It
is. I mean, it made me want to know. I mean, I'm like, Front Range Butcher. What exactly does that mean? So that's why I asked, because I thought there's got to be a story behind that.
Yes, the Colorado Front Range, and he covers the area of here from the southern part of the Denver area metro up north, even a little further, and they call that the Front Range area. So yes. It seemed like a really good name, and I'm sure when you have killers, somebody always want to give them a name, a moniker of some kind to identify them. I don't know if that makes it. Probably sells a lot of papers, or magazines, or it gets a lot of people clicking on websites or whatever. So.
Okay, so now lead us into Man in the Crossfire. Are they affiliated? How do they kind of go together?
Yes, so the second storyline in the Front Range Butcher carries over, and there's an associate that Jarvis has worked with. He's worked with him through a couple of books, and he was hired by him in the Front Range Butcher to track down someone relating to something that happened in his past. And he is found dead. So Jarvis is hired by another associate of his to try to figure out what happened to him, and he ends up going to Southern California, which is where he was killed at, to try to figure out what happens, and gets involved and digs deeper and finds a mess, a really big mess. And he actually ends up going back and forth between Denver and San Diego because he has another case he'd been working on more of the old style. What a lot of detectives do is, they watch the cheating spouses. Well, this was a cheating spouse one.
Gotcha.
And he did this job. He didn't like to do those type of jobs anymore, but he did take this job because his lawyer hired him, and he's like, you can make a lot of money on this. So he's kind of bouncing back and forth between the two. But about half the book is spent in San Diego, about the other half in San Diego, Southern California, LA, San Diego. And he gets caught up in a mess, and that's what caught in the crossfire. He's caught in the crossfire between some warring factions, so to speak. And not sure if he's going to get out of this alive. So the cover, which I don't have the book yet, I revealed the cover today, but the cover has a headstone on there with a fedora on the top of the headstone and a gun, a little shoulder holster hanging off the side of it, and it says R.I.P. Jarvis Mann. So a little hint
neat.
Possible.
Well, I believe you've sent me some artwork that I'll include in the blog post that will accompany this podcast and video. So y'all be sure and look for the cover of Man in the Crossfire. And when does it break?
March 25th is when it's released. It is available on pre-order now on ebooks, and it will be on Kindle Unlimited for anyone who uses Kindle Unlimited. And all my books, except for the very first short story, are on Kindle Unlimited for anyone who uses that service. And then I will have paperback probably in a few weeks. It takes a little bit more to get the paperback formatted correctly and stuff. It's kind of a pain sometimes. So different sizes for
writer's life. I swear your work is never done. If you're not busy writing, you're editing. If you're not editing, you're cover arting. If you're not cover arting, you're formatting. If you're not formatting, you're uploading. It's never ending.
Yes, or marketing. Yeah, I mean, it's especially for independent authors. You're in control of everything, but you got to do everything. And I do pay people like I don't do the cover art. I have somebody I pay to do the cover art, and thankfully, because I've got no skills, but do it. But I do have the ideas, and she does a great job of taking what I tell her and turn it into what I think is eye catching. And I've always gotten pretty good feedback on all my covers, and the new cover. Very much so. And I know a lot of people, when they see the cover of the Front Range Butcher, they look at that and go, oh my gosh, if you like serial killer books.
Right. I'm excited. I do like serial killer books. When I was just a teen, I was cutting my teeth on the story of the Manson murder. So, I started out at a young age with serial killer books. So I'm really excited about that, and I hope to get that real soon.
We actually bring up Charles Manson in the Front Range Butcher as well.
So do you really? Well, he's probably one of the best known serial killers. He's got a face that's been all over the news many, many times. So we are getting down to our last little while of the show, and I just want to give you an opportunity to promote. Now, you did just tell us a few places where we could find your work. We need website info, Facebook info, and anything else we need to know about how to find your books.
Yeah, my website is just rweir.net, so rweir.net, and I am on Facebook. It's Randy. Facebook won't let you do it in a single letter for your first name, so I have to do Randy Weir author, and then I do have a Jarvis Mann page as well, and it's just if you search it under Jarvis Mann PI. That's a page, and I'm on Twitter as well, and social media. I'm on Instagram, all that stuff. Used to be on Google Plus, but they're dying now, so Google's finally putting the end of them. And but all my books are available on Amazon exclusively, except for the first short story, The Case of the Missing Bubblegum Card. It's actually available on all and it's just a short story. It's only like 8,000 words, and it's actually free everywhere. So anyone can download that first book, get a little taste of how Jarvis is, how
he came to be.
Yeah, kind of what he's like a little bit. Really no violence, and it's a very basic, simple story. Not even any language. Young adults, even young kids could even read the book. So on that one, the other books are very adult, so or at least older teens. But
y'all read the blurbs.
That's
Gotta read the blurbs.
Gotta read the blurbs. Yes.
So we always have a little segment on this show where the author gives an aspiring author a bit of advice. Give them something to go home with and say, well, our Weir said this, and he's very successful, and I'm going to do what he said.
Well, I think my biggest thing that I would tell people is write because you love it. Don't write to get rich, because the odds of you getting rich or making a lot of money at this are pretty small. If you're lucky enough, and some people are very lucky and make a good living, but don't go into it thinking you're going to make a living at it. If you're able to make a living at it later, great. Don't give up your day job, as they say at first.
Right.
Get out there, but write because you love it and you enjoy it, and try not to let it frustrate you too much, because it will. But hopefully the words are good, and you'll get a lot of you're going to get a lot of good feedback, and you're going to get some bad feedback too. So you got to have some pretty thick skin. But that would be my biggest advice to people. Do it because you love it.
Yeah, and that's excellent advice. Excellent advice, because as we already know, there's an awful lot of books out there, and for you to be able to be, famous at publishing a book, I mean, you've got to stand a head and shoulders above the rest. And if you are doing it because you love it, that's all that matters. If nobody ever reads it, you did it because it had to come out. It was something that was in you that you wanted to produce. And we're all storytellers at heart. And I always say, it doesn't matter whether anybody ever buys it or ever reads it. You told the story in your heart that you wanted to tell. And that's important. I mean, that's why we do this. We do it because we love to do it, not because we're trying to make money at it, really.
Yeah, and you get it out of your blood sometimes too. I know for me, I sit down and write, and I get it out of my blood. It's running through my mind. It's running through my veins. I get it. I write it. I'm done with it. I'm on to the next thing. But yes, get it out of your system. Sometimes it can be therapeutic too.
That's true. That's true. And I think that sometimes that's why I take long stretches between books, because I put so much into the last one that there's nothing left. I got to go out and refill the well some way.
Yes, you've got to have that inspiration to get you to write. And I know some people on Twitter I've been talking to, and she goes, well, I only write a couple hundred words a day. And it's like, there are days when I don't write anything, but there are days when I'm plus to write, and I would write tons. So when you feel the inspiration to write. Yeah. Hopefully you have the time to do it, and that's the other issue. If we all didn't have to sleep, especially if we're working a full-time job,
right,
we could probably get a lot more written. But it's some of that is it's just so much time with family and everything else. So.
Yeah, that's what retirement is for. I can't wait to get there.
Yes, I know.
Well, it has been fabulous having you on Writer Groupie podcast. I'm so excited to get an opportunity to chat with you, and now I'm all excited about your books. I got to go out and start with the first one and work my way down, because I am like that. I guess it's just my weird mind. I want to start with the very beginning and work my way down to see how the character grows and evolves. That's mainly, but so I'm really excited about your series. And I'd love for you to come back. If you want to come back on the show and promote Man in the Crossfire a little bit later on, after it comes out, do a soft launch or something.
Sure.
Just get in touch with me and we'll do another show.
Absolutely. I'm always happy to be on. Love talking about books.
All right. Well, hang on, and we'll get right back to you, and we'll chat some more in just a moment.
Okay.
Y'all be sure and come back. Look us up. You need to go subscribe, like, share, and subscribe. I'm just telling you, that's my final word. That's my final answer. This episode is brought to you by E.J. Linden, the author of A Private Practice. And the product description reads, someone is murdering men around the city of Pittsburgh. The victims have one thing in common. They've all been identified as perpetrators of domestic violence. Detective Susan Wyckoff and Frank Dillard are on the case. Their only clue, the letter carved into the bloodied palms of each of the victims. E.J. Linden is a writer of mystery and suspense, words that also define the author. A Private Practice is E.J.'s debut novel featuring Detective Susan Wyckoff. EJ lives to write. When not writing, EJ enjoys pizza and beer with friends, watching pro football, and long walks in the park. Okay, that last part isn't quite true. Watch for more to come from EJ Linden. Available for Kindle on Amazon.
Infinity Author Services for your author services needs. We create professionally designed book covers as well as provide editing, promotions, update your social media accounts, and WordPress site. Let Infinity Author Services increase the exposure of your novels with our exciting promo packages. You can find out more at infinityauthors.com. Infinity Author Services for the indie author in you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Writer Groupie. For booking information, show notes, and more, visit writergroupie.net.